An accidental medical error during a surgery has left your left arm with a severe nerve damage, resulting in no sensations, movements, or feelings. We are sorry, the chances of recovery are minimal. I still remember the day I was told this. There was rage, anger, and frustration on one side. On the other side, I was like the scared little girl, vulnerable and fearful. And hoping to contain all my feelings, I bit my lips so hard that they began to bleed. As a 26-year-old then, the world as I knew came crashing down within seconds. Why me? What did I do to deserve this? Why did God do this to me? Along with this helplessness, there was also shame and guilt, as if I had done something about it or I could have avoided this in some way. I was clinically depressed. There was also fears about my future. My dreams were getting shattered. When I have my babies, can I cradle them in both my arms? What's my future going to look like? Can I drive? Can I cook? Can I even tie my ponytail? Can I work? I was going through severe anxiety and panic attacks. And I realized it was not just about the arm. My whole identity was being questioned. Am I worthless? Am I damaged? Am I disabled? Who am I now? Do I want to live on? Or so I thought. Up until this point, my early childhood and my early adulthood was that of really high performance, high achieving, type A personality, perfectionist. Academically, I was a powerhouse. I stood 9th in my 12th grade examination in my whole state in India out of about 400 or 500,000 students. I got into a fully funded master's computer science program with an on-campus job, and it was a big deal for an immigrant like me. Even at my workplace, I was a superstar there. And one year, I was also recognized as the top 50 significant contributors in a huge company. And in this moment, my identity as a perfectionist was being challenged. I was in this imperfect body with a disabled arm. My identity as somebody who could go and chase success on her own terms was being challenged. I felt like a big failure in life. My identity as somebody who was powerful, taking control of my own life, was being challenged. I was this powerless victim of life. And I also lost my parents, both in the same span. It just felt like everything was just working against me. During the course of a few more years, I developed post-traumatic stress disorders and symptoms like fibromyalgia, chronic pain, chronic fatigue, tension myoneural syndrome, severe insomnia, and I was always hypervigilant. I was always contracted. My body was always contracted. I'd forgotten how to relax. I'd forgotten how to smile. I'd forgotten how to even live my life. And the worst part was that I lost a connection to myself. I did not feel the same as before. I felt I was damaged. I felt I needed to be fixed to even live a life. Traumatic experiences can happen to anybody. In fact, nationalcouncil.org says that about 70% of the adults in the US might go through at least one traumatic event in their life. But here's the interesting part. Whether an event is deemed traumatic or not is based on the subjective experience of the event rather than the event itself, which now means that trauma has a broad category, all the way from childhood emotional neglect, childhood emotional suppression, bullying, to physical, mental, sexual abuse, to medical interventions, illness, sickness, shock, grief, accidents, and all the way up to the violence in war, natural disasters, or even by being a witness to any one of these. Although the suffering and the pain seems unbearable, how is it that we also see so many people who have not only survived these terrible experiences, but have gone beyond surviving and living and thriving and living their life to the fullest extent. What if I told you that there is a hidden power in trauma? That it can not only act as a catalyst to your personal growth, but it can be the very source that can awaken our true potentiality of resilience, of hope, of trust, of compassion, of love, of empathy, of clarity, of creativity and intelligence. Yes, and I can vouch for that. That trauma can lead to positive change if we choose to and if we know how to. Many years ago, I thought and I believed that I was cursed to go through a trauma. But today, I stand here to say that it was in fact a blessing in disguise for me to go through this, because somehow the trauma and the deep suffering forced me to rediscover a forgotten aspect, myself. To bring about any post-traumatic growth, we really need to change our perspective to trauma. We need to start seeing it with fresher set of eyes. Professor Stephen Joseph, one of the leading post-traumatic growth researchers, has put this into a very beautiful vase metaphor. Imagine that one day you accidentally knock a treasured vase. It smashes into tiny pieces. What do? Do you try to put the vase back together exactly as it was? Do you collect the pieces and drop them in the rubbish as the vase is a total loss? Or do you pick up the beautiful colored pieces and use them to make something new, such as a colorful mosaic? The biggest change happened for me when I changed my relationship to my trauma. I did not try to put the pieces together and glue them to get back to the original me. Instead, I accepted the trauma as it was. Nothing to avoid, nothing to reject, nothing to resist. I realized that if this trauma was going to be with me for the rest of my life, why not have a more compassionate, more loving, more curious kind of a relationship with it? And lastly, the most important realization, that the pain of my trauma was inevitable. I could not have done anything about it. However, the suffering that I put around it, that I was cursed, this should not have happened to me, that there is no hope in my life, that part was completely optional. In fact, I realized that I was suffering more in my imagination than in reality. This was the turning point in my life. I not only healed my arm, my trauma, I went beyond that. Now, the most important question is, how do we move forward? Not in spite of trauma, but with the trauma and because of the trauma. Let me share with you 3 simple shifts that have helped me to take me from a place of merely surviving and suffering to a place of thriving. These steps may seem a little bit counterintuitive for you, but trauma healing needs a different perspective. We change our relationship to the trauma. We change our relationship to our inner experiences. We change our relationship to ourselves. And finally, the relationship we have with the world changes. The first shift from avoidance to that of acceptance. Shift from avoidance to that of acceptance. Now I want to read you a quote by Albert Einstein. Once we accept our limits, we go beyond them. You know, I try to do a lot of avoiding, resisting, controlling my negative thoughts and feelings and sensations and memories. In fact, I did a lot of positive thinking, positive affirmations, positive attitude, positive yada, yada, yada. But I realized the more I was trying to resist and avoid my negative feelings, the more they would come back. In fact, the second time they came back with an even greater vengeance and a greater intensity. It was like this boiling lava under a surface. If I would press it on one side, it would come on the other side next time, even with the greater pressure. The paradox was that me trying to control and avoid the negative feelings was the very thing that was keeping me in this vicious cycle of suffering. As they say, what you resist persists. Until I had a shift from that of avoidance and resistance to that of willingness and acceptance. Acceptance did not mean that my trauma was okay, but it gave me a different perspective to look at my own inner experiences. How? By ending the struggle with it. Acceptance was the first step. That my arm would never heal, that was accepted. The pain will be with me for the rest of my life, that was accepted. The trauma and the memories of it will always stay with me for the rest of my life again, and that was accepted. And even if I was not okay with any one of these, that still was accepted. That was the power of acceptance. A lot changed after this. The second shift. Shifting from being afraid to being aware. Shifting from being afraid to being aware. Here's another quote by Sydney Banks, a Scottish philosopher. If the only thing that people learned was not to be afraid of their experience, that alone would change the world. Although I did the acceptance part of it, every time I would just be aware of my internal experiences, I would just get lost in them. I would become those thoughts, feelings, and sensations. And for anybody who has gone through a trauma, the differentiation between an imagination and reality is very difficult. And the simple antidote to that was being aware. Probably a blessing for us as humans. With awareness practices, I developed a distance from me as awareness to my feelings, thoughts, and sensations and memories. So now I could witness them from a distance without getting lost in them. And I realized that these experiences were just transient. They would just come and go, come and go, come and go. And the second profound realization I had was that no matter how ecstatic and blissful my experiences were, or how horrific and terrible and awful my experiences were, at the end of the day, if you could deconstruct an experience, experience was just a conglomeration of thoughts, feelings, and sensations, nothing more, nothing less. My experiences became less daunting, and I could witness them from a distance. A lot of my suffering reduced just with this act of being aware. The final shift. This may seem a little bit counterintuitive, but this is where it all comes together. Shift from wanting to feel better to becoming better at feeling. Let me repeat that. Shift from wanting to feel better to becoming better at feeling. This quote is from Glennon Doyle, author of Untamed. Feeling all your feelings is hard, but that's what they're for. Feelings are for feeling, all of them, even the hard ones. You know, I was always chasing positive experiences. I always wanted to feel happy, blissful, joyful, peace, content, fulfilled. And all the time I wanted to feel these positive experiences, positive feelings. But in the pursuit and chase of always trying to feel positive, I had taken a part of myself, separated that out, and put them into this negative, dark, void closet that I never wanted to see. And they were like abandoned children, hoping to get my presence, love, and attention. They just wanted to feel safe. But trauma taught me what true healing was all about, what true compassion is all about, what the true meaning of self-love was all about. It wasn't easy, but I learned how to be present to all my feelings, the complete spectrum, both positive and the negative ones. And I started feeling all my feelings somatically through this body, through the intelligence of the body. And I realized that even the most horrific experiences transmuted into a kind of awakeness, into a kind of aliveness, into a kind of internal joy for no reason at all. It happened naturally. I didn't have to do anything. This act of feeling all my feelings, I not only healed my accidental trauma, but many of the childhood conditioning, childhood memories, cultural conditioning that was not helping me anymore. It felt like I was being reborn again. And as in the vase metaphor, I started building my mosaic little by little, as a wife, as a mother, as a corporate technical leader, as a multi-pageant winner, as a creative artist, as a creative singer, and as an executive transformative coach, helping many others to reclaim and rebuild their mosaic, their life, little by little. I really wish nobody ever goes through a trauma or a deep suffering. But if that happens, remember that it doesn't have to be a negative consequence. You can get outside, you can come outside of it, changed for the better, transformed for the better. We just don't get over a trauma. We make space for it. We carry it, we live with it, and sometimes we thrive because of it. But the real question is, what do you choose? Because remember one thing, the trauma can be hell on earth, but the growth from trauma is a gift from the heaven. Thank you.